Okay, so welcome back to everyone. Tonight we are going to take a journey through our history. But before we do that, is there a single word that you think encapsulates Jewish history? Any suggestions?
Geula.
Sorry? Geula, okay. Thank you. What else?
A journey.
So, again, sorry?
A journey.
Journey.
Faith.
Faith.
Miracle.
Miracle. Any other suggestions? Okay, here is one word. Roller coaster. A journey of dramatic ups and downs. Some euphoric highs, some devastating lows. Moments of triumph, moments of tragedy. You just have to read the book of Judges or the book of Kings and you kind of very soon get the flavor and then follow history through from that point onwards. So here is our roller coaster. And that doesn't quite fit with everything we've been learning about in the last three lessons, because particularly in the first lesson, we argued that the world was created for purpose, that we're headed in the right direction. We said that we've been making tremendous progress over the generations, with millions, perhaps millions, hundreds of millions, perhaps even billions of mitzvot and good deeds have been performed. And every single one of them makes this world a little bit more habitable for God. Each one is laying another brick in the home that God desires. And so therefore, it would be reasonable to assume that if we could look back at history and map the spiritual progress and see how the world has been steadily advancing, we'll see a graph that keeps going upwards. But it's not the case. And as we know, even in our recent history with the Holocaust, that Marilyn Scheinman wanted to talk about in the very first of our sessions. Sometimes it's been 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And what we want to try and show tonight, but we have to get our heads around it, is that actually there's another way of looking at our history and seeing it as comprised of entirely of steps forward. And that means that we need to look again at some of the key events, particularly some of the negative events, and try and understand them in a different way. And perhaps one of the ways to understand this is by an analogy with a key. Because a key has ridges and grooves, it has ups and downs, but they're not random. There's a pattern, and they're meticulously and perfectly aligned in order to be able to achieve the desired objective, which is to open a lock. And it is possible that we could find the same truth within our spiritual history, that the ups and downs are like the keys of a lock, very carefully guided for one single purpose, and that is to unlock the destiny and the purpose of creation. Because by now we must be familiar with this idea, this Jewish idea, that the world is not just a series of random events, but that it is purposeful, it has a beginning, a middle, and it leads to an end. And this course is all about trying to understand that process and what the end is. So to get where we're headed tonight, we need a kind of new openness to see things from a new perspective. And we're going to question the definitions that we have traditionally applied to historical events, where we've, in binary terms, described them as good or bad. But before we can do that, before we can redefine our spiritual history tonight, we have to just very briefly revisit, because we've done all of this in the previous 3 sessions, the purpose of creation, which we discussed in detail, particularly in the last 2 sessions. And you'll recall that the purpose of creation was expressed by sages very pithily in the Midrash, and that is to be your text number 1 on page 139. And since it is very short, I'm going to read it to you. And it reads as follows. B'shah shebara HaKadosh Baruch et ha'olam, at the time that the Almighty created the world, nitava sheyeheh lo dira b'tachtonim, it was his desire that he should have a home here in this lowest of worlds or lowest of realms. Now, there are a number of key points in this very important Midrash. There are three core principles contained in this brief teaching, and it's important that we get them because we're going to be looking at these throughout tonight, and these are going to be the criteria against which we are going to measure every event that happens. So the first thing that this Midrash, in this short Midrash, wants to teach us is that God wants to be in the lowest of all worlds. And again, low is not intended to describe a spatial relationship. The Midrash isn't describing that our world is somehow geographically lower. But high and low are terms which are used to indicate a thing's spiritual transparency, to what extent it reveals or it conceals its source and its creator. So the first point is that it has to be in the lowest of all worlds. The second is this idea that mentioned here in the Midrash, which we explained in some detail last week, that the Almighty wants a home. And the Midrash intentionally is using the word home in describing God's ultimate objective and desire, because in our human experience, a home is not just a place that a person may inhabit, like an office or a car or a supermarket or a park. A home, as we discussed last week, and we're just going to revise this very quickly now, is a qualitatively different space. And that's our text number 2 on page 141, which is quite a long text, and it'd be really nice if somebody were to start off by reading it.
I'll volunteer tonight.
Thank you so much.
To start
Okay,
with.
great.
Thank you. The emphasis on transforming this material world, especially in the home for God, informs us that the ultimate goal is for godliness to be revealed here, in the tangible reality of this world, to the extent and naturalness which is analogous to the way a person is when found within his or her own home. When we take a stroll or pay a visit to a friend, we are forced to limit our self-expression to the degree which is appropriate for our present location. By contrast, when we are in our own home, we can be ourselves openly and to the fullest extent. Similarly, the revelation of godliness must be overt and with full expression for God's desire, a home in the lowest realm. Furthermore, Jewish law insists that we must not view a king while he is without clothing, for that would undermine respect for the monarchy. Despite that, when he is in his own home, there are specific instances in which the king will indeed be without clothing.
Can I just interrupt you? Just let me interrupt you for a moment, because Lydia is saying she's not seeing the text on the screen, and that is because the text isn't on the screen. The text is in your workbooks, and it's text number 2 on page 141 in your workbook. Okay. The only thing which is on the sleeve on the screen is me and one slide of the roller coaster. Is that what you can see? Okay. Sorry, Alan, please continue.
Similarly, the ultimate purpose for God's desire to transform our material reality into a home, specifically, is that, as Rabbi Shmuel Zalman of Ladia explains, God longs to finally reveal and express himself without any garment. God conveys his desire to us through a prophecy regarding the future redemption, at which point the goal of establishing a dwelling for God in the material reality will have been achieved. No longer will your teacher garb himself, which means that he will no longer conceal himself from you with a robe or garment.
So this is the Lubavitcher Rebbe explaining the concept of a home and saying that a home is a place where a person is able to walk around naked if they want. And the same way when we talk about God being in the home, in his home in the world, naked in the sense that we don't see him through garbs or through clothing, etc., but that you experience his essence. So that's what God wanted ultimately. The first thing was it has to be in the lowest of all the worlds, in other words, our world. Then it has to be a home. And the third quality and characteristic is that it has to be, the work has to be done by the inhabitants of this lowest realm. God is not looking to impose his presence on us. It's something which we have to find for ourselves. We have to uncover and discover God in the world. And that is text number 3 in your workbooks on page 142. And Alan, please just read this shorter text as well to get this principle knocked in.
To unlock, sorry. God's intention is having a home in the lowest realms, is for the lowest realms to become a home for God on its own terms. For that reason, the home must be achieved through the effects of human beings, the soul of Israel or corporeal bodies, for only then are the lowest realms themselves reformed into a home for God. By contrast, if a home would be imposed through a transformative revelation from above, the lowest realm themselves would not be on their own terms, a home for God.
So God wishes that we of our own choosing, through our own efforts, our own actions, transform this world into a place in which God feels fully at home. And it's the same as in a human relationship. Someone who's compelled to be with us rather than wanting to be with us is really not with us at all. So to summarize, we look on page 143 at figure number 4.1, God's tripartite desire. The first thing is to be present here in the lowest of realms. The second is to be fully at home in this lowest of realms. And the third is to have a home in the lowest of realms which are created by the inhabitants of the lowest realms. And critically now, it is only when all three core principles converge, that all three of these conditions are fulfilled, that is when God's original intention and purpose in creating the world is achieved. And even if one detail is missing, the ultimate purpose is still lacking. So here we see this in these slides. And therefore, just to work this through, if a higher or a spiritual realm serves as a home for God, that fails to satisfy one of the objectives. If this lowest world in which we occupy becomes more divinely aware and sensitive, but not to the extent of being conducive to God's essence, then that too is going to fail to satisfy the objective. And if this world in which we live suddenly magically becomes transformed to be a space that is conducive to God's essence, but it doesn't come about through our own doing, then once again we have failed to satisfy the objective. Once again, these are three important principles which we're going to follow through the course of the evening. Keep them in mind. Now, with that introduction, we are going to explore Jewish history in 4 acts. Of course, we're not able to explore every event in Jewish history, because to do that will take us pretty much just as long as it took for that history to happen, and we're not going to be here for that long. So we're not going to examine all of history and plot its forward progression. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on 4 major historical acts, or 4 primary ups and downs that constitute the fundamental stages of the world's positive progress. And they are depicted in an important page now in your workbooks, on page 144, on page 4.2. Now, let me just help you work through this double page, which should be in front of you. Once again, page 144. So here you have the first act is the act of creation, and just below that, that's the peak, and the trough that follows on it is the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. The second peak that we're going to explore is when Abraham is born, and the trough that follows is Jacob and his family descending down to Egypt. The third peak is on the second page, the next page, the Exodus from Egypt and the giving of the Torah at Sinai, followed by a trough, which of course is the sin of the golden calf. And the third episode is the building of the temple, first and second temple, of course, followed by the exile in which we are still find ourselves in. So those are the four peaks and troughs that we're going to explore tonight and try and get a handle on and see how they work together in terms of a forward motion. We're going to start with the Garden of Eden. So we're going to start with our spiritual, we're going to start at the very beginning. The world, of course, was a beautiful place. It was a paradise, both physically and spiritually. And we have two texts on page 147, 148, text 4 and 5. The first text is the quotation from the Torah, and the next text, number 5, is its explanation, the explanation of it taken from the Midrash. So would somebody please read texts 4 and 5 to describe the beauty of the Garden of Eden and the way in which it was indeed a paradise? Any volunteer?
I'll do it, sure.
Thank you. Text number 4.
God planted a garden in the eastern side of Eden, and he placed there the man whom he had formed. God caused to sprout from the ground every tree that was pleasant to see and good to eat.
And then the Midrash wants to comment on the word garden and explain that based upon the Song of Songs. So please continue with text number 5.
I have come to my garden. The verse does not speak of a garden, gan in Hebrew, but rather my garden, gani, for the sake of implying
Genuni.
my
Genuni.
marital home, the location which originally served as my primary residence. For was not God's primary essence originally located within the lowest realm?
So God is present in the Garden of Eden. It's a really great start. Okay? And it's should be showing you a slide of the Garden of Eden. Act 1, Garden of Eden. Okay. Oh, I've got to do some more slides. So here's, this is just a bit of revision. Act 1 is the Garden of Eden and the Tree of Knowledge. Act 2 is Abraham's monotheistic revolution, and the down is the Egyptian slavery. Act number 3 is the Exodus and the Revelation, and the down is the golden calf. And act number 4 is the Holy Temple, followed by exile. And that brings us now to the Garden of Eden, a perfect world inhabited by God. Well, let's continue with the story. Well, that was the state of the world at the beginning of time. It was a place of immense physical and spiritual beauty. You can see how beautiful the picture is. It looks just like Regent's Park on a lovely spring day. A perfect world designed, and not just designed, but inhabited by God. Now, if God wanted a home on earth, as the Midrash told us earlier, it would seem that he got exactly what he desired. Mission accomplished. But based on our earlier discussion, remember the 3 qualities, characteristics, criteria that have to be present in order to fulfill God's purpose in creating the universe? Based upon that earlier discussion, was the divine goal fulfilled by the existence of the Garden of Eden? And if not, why? So think about those 3 issues: lowest, home, done by us, our effort. What's missing?
Done by us.
For one thing. In fact, there is an inevitable deficiency in any paradise created by God, exactly as you've said, insofar as God's intention and purpose lie. Remember, God wants a home for his essence in the lowest of all worlds, created by the creatures of the lowly realm. And Gan Eden, Garden of Eden, wasn't this for the following reasons. For one thing, the world wasn't nearly as low as it's going to get. Yes? There's no human, we haven't messed it up yet. So it's still a beautiful world. It's not the lowest state that the world can be in. It was a spiritual paradise created by God. And actually it wasn't even a home for God's essence. Because although Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, was in sync with the Creator, but creation was yet at that stage still unaware of God's essential being beyond his role as a creator. And we're going to look at that a little bit further in the class tonight. And of course, as you've all mentioned, the world didn't embrace God of its own. It was imposed from without by God, who had placed his imprint upon paradise. This was his doing, not ours. And so clearly this paradise is God's paradise, not our paradise. And therefore it wasn't yet the fulfillment of the ultimate purpose of existence. For that to happen, something dramatic and drastic would have to happen. But the question is why he created this beautiful world. And the answer is because, you know, when you buy a model that you're going to make, and you open the box and it's got thousands and thousands of pieces, or even a jigsaw or whatever, but perhaps a Lego model or a Meccano model or something like that is a better example, and you don't know how to go about it. Fortunately, there's a beautiful picture printed on the box of what your fantastic model is going to look like when you're finished. And they make it look really great. I mean, it never looks like that in the end, because they put in all the surrounding stuff and everything else. So the Almighty created for us a kind of a picture to hold up, a snapshot. It wasn't the real thing, but it was a glimpse of what we could have, what we can have, what we have to kind of work towards. And then what you do is you push the box cover with a picture on it to one side, and you start messing around with the pieces in the construction set. And you start reading the instructions, and you start connecting the pieces together in the right way so that you can build your model to look like the picture on the box. So the first thing you have to do is you've got to get the snapshot out of the way so that you can begin with the pieces. And in our terms, historical terms, what that means is enter the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Because if there was ever an action that would blow up the picture of paradise, this was it. But looked at from a higher perspective, one could look at this act of the tree of knowledge, which we discussed in a previous course, in a slightly different way. Adam and Eve's act of defiance destroyed what was, so there may be what can be. That's kind of like the next slides. They destroyed this beautiful world to make room for what can be. And what can be at this point in time is a blank canvas. So we see this in text number 6a and 6b on page 150 of your workbooks. Once again, it is a text 6a from the book of Genesis, and 6b is a comment on this, once again by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Would somebody please read texts 6a and 6b on page 150 and 151?
I will.
Thanks.
God expelled Adam from the Garden of Eden. He sent Adam out to work the earth whence he had been taken. The deeper spiritual reason for Adam's eviction from the Garden of Eden is because God's ultimate goal for creation is that he should have a home in the lowest realm. This goal demands that God's home be fashioned, A, within the realm which is the absolute lowest, and B, using the natural materiality of the lowest realm itself. Adam was therefore dispatched from the Garden of Eden to work the earth, meaning to make the earth his physical dimension of space receptive to divine revelation. This way, A, even the lowest plane of reality that lacks the overt spirituality of the Garden of Eden will become a home for God, and B, the divine home will be fashioned from the reality of material existence.
Thank you. So look, we can't take away the fact that this was an act of divine defiance, that it plunged the world into a state of darkness, and that it was a sin. But at the same time, from another perspective, the sin of the tree of knowledge was a necessary step forward in achieving the purpose that God had set out for creation. It's a very radical idea that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is introducing over here, so let's explain it a bit further. The sin of the tree of knowledge, of course, led to humanity's expulsion from paradise. So no longer would mankind be able to enjoy time in the spiritually aware environment of the Garden of Eden. Now, mankind has to inhabit a world that is filled with, that even challenges the very notion of a creator. The post-sin world is radically lower than it was before. But relative to God's purpose, it's a necessary step forward, because now the world is objectively low. It's not blinded any longer by obvious divine light. Now people could begin to engage in divine pursuit of their own volition. And of course, that's exactly what we did. And if you start to read the Bible and the generations which follow on from Adam and from Eve, people begin to deny the existence of God. They turn to the worship of idols. But that's exactly what God wants. Not that you should serve idols, but that man should seek him in a world where his presence is concealed. Find me, he says. Find me, expose me.
Omar,
Yes.
could I ask a question, please? It's just something that wasn't clear to me. I thought I'd missed the key point. So the Garden of Eden wasn't actually Hashem's ideal, and the catalyst for the fall, from what I understand, was Adam and Eve going against God's will and eating the fruit that they shouldn't have. But that's termed in common parlance as the original sin. But from what you said, that was actually, couldn't that have been an elevated act to try and bring about Hashem's...
It is. They didn't do it for that reason. They did it as an act of defiance, an act of sin.
Okay.
But the outcome of it is that it brings the world to a lower state, which is what God actually ultimately wants. Because in the lowest state, we lose God and we have to try and find him, and that's what he wants of us. So the process by which God's presence is concealed and in which man begins to seek him or not seek him as he wishes has now begun. And so in summary, although the words seem to began in a seemingly picture-perfect state, it was actually through the sin of Adam and Eve that the stage was set to begin the process of achieving the purpose of creation. So this was history's first up and down. Paradise made, paradise lost. And in the bigger picture, it actually represents, paradoxically, a step forward in the fulfillment of God's intent and purpose. So you can see this in figure number 4.3 on page 152, or you can see it on this slide over here, okay? Now, here is the Garden of Eden, and there are our three criteria. It has to be a lowly realm, God's essence has to be present in it, and has to be built by us. And now we're going to start ticking or crossing the boxes. We're going to be playing a game of bingo tonight, and when you find a box that has got 3 ticks in it, shout out loudly, bingo, or Mashiach, whatever you want, whichever comes first, okay? Let's take a look at Garden of Eden. What does it meet? Well, it's not the lowly realm. It's not God's essence, because there's only God as a creator, and it wasn't built by us. So Garden of Eden, unfortunately, doesn't do the trick, and we have to move on in history. So, the next spiritual milestone. Post-sin, the world is primed, it's ready. After the original sin in the Garden of Eden, there are no further descents. There were further descents. After that, you've got the first murder, the generation of the flood, the Tower of Babel, the people of Sodom, and a whole host of other nasties which creep up. Doesn't make great reading, after the story of the Garden of Eden. It's just a downward trip all the way. It gets really depressing. And over the course of these generations, as you read it in the Bible itself, you recognize that humankind has lost all connection with its Creator. It's extraordinary. People are completely steeped in idol worship. There's no recognition of God in the world. And they defy all the forces of nature. God is completely absent in the eyes of mankind, completely out of the picture. So there's no garden, there's no home, there's no place on earth where God is recognized. Enter Abraham. Sorry, that wasn't a very poor trumpet. This is how Maimonides describes Abraham's discovery of the Creator and his efforts to educate the world. It's quite a long piece, but let's just give you a click over here. This is a really disappointing slide. Abraham discovered and taught the truth about the Creator of the world. Unfortunately, JLI did not produce for us a photograph of Abraham. I'm so disappointed. Okay. In fact, you can't even see the face of Abraham over here. But at any rate, we've got a long text from Maimonides on page 155. It's called The Revolutionary. Would somebody please read it for us?
I'll have a go.
Thank you.
After this mighty person, Abraham, was weaned, he began to ponder deeply. Though he was a young child, he began to contemplate by day and by night. He had no teacher, nor was there anyone to inform him. Rather, he was mired in Ur-Kasdim's population of foolish idolaters. His father, mother, and all the people around him worshipped idols. He would worship along with them, but his heart was engaged, analysing everything, and he gained a clear understanding. Ultimately, he arrived at the true way and understood the path of righteousness through his accurate comprehension. He realised that there was one God, that he created everything, and that there is no other God amongst all that exists. Abraham was 40 years old when he became fully aware of his Creator. He then used his recognition and knowledge of the Creator to formulate presentations for the population of Ur-Kasdim and to debate them, informing them that they were not following the true path. When he won them over with the strength of his arguments, the king desired to execute him. His life was spared through a miracle, and he relocated to Haran. He then began a public campaign, loudly proclaiming to all humanity and informing them that in all the universe there is but one God, and that to him alone is it appropriate to worship. He travelled to publicise his message everywhere, rallying people in city after city, kingdom after kingdom, until he arrived in the land of Canaan. At every location, he proclaimed God's existence. As it is stated, Abraham proclaimed there in the name of the eternal God. When the people would rally to him, questioning him regarding his statements, he would explain to each individual according to their understanding, until he had brought that individual back to the true path. Eventually, thousands and myriads rallied around Abraham. They are the folk referred to in the Torah as the people of the house of Abraham, in whose hearts he firmly planted this great fundamental principle.
Well, yes, so Abraham begins telling the world about God. He's a major nudge, isn't he? I mean, he's just driving everybody crazy. They're all thinking one thing, and he's got this bee in his bonnet, and he's going around. It reminds me of once in Oxford Street, I saw a man with a placard which said, "The world ends on Friday." you know. And he stops somebody and I hear him speaking to somebody, hey mate, can you lend me a couple of bob until Monday? So Abraham is this extraordinary person. He's just a one-off. The world is not a wild jungle. It's a beautiful garden. It's created intentionally by God. All that you see is guided by God. It's Him. It's only Him. He steers nature. And slowly but surely, people begin opening to the fact that, yes, there is a God. And with Abraham, the world begins to evolve to become more of, once again, a home for God. And his work continues with his son Isaac, and with Isaac's sons Jacob, and they all share the same vision and the same commitment to make known throughout the world that there's a God who's a creator and a conductor of the universe. You know, think about it this way. Throughout history, there have been certain pivotal moments. The Copernican revolution, for example, which completely changed people's perceptions of self. Because until then, everybody thought that we were the center of the universe, until Copernicus said, no, we're just a little speck rotating around the sun. The Industrial Revolution, the theory of relativity, the digital age, and now the AI age. Abraham's discovery was the revolution of his age. That's the way I understand it. But nevertheless, despite this amazing progress, this is still not yet what God envisioned. Because the recognition that the patriarchs introduced into the world is about God as the creator and the architect of nature. Well, what's wrong with that? And that's the key words in the previous text from Maimonides. Abraham was 40 years old when he became fully aware of his creator. But you see, God wants to be known on earth not just as its creator. He wants us to know his essence. His essence is beyond his role as a creator. You know, as we explained earlier in the Midrash, essence means the whole God is there in himself. And that means he wants us to feel and to be in touch with his presence. You're not in touch with the presence of a creator. A creator is remote. He wants us to go beyond the context of creator-creation relationship. He doesn't want to be known only by what he does. He wants us to know who he is. And again, there's an analogy over here. A young child doesn't see their parent as an actual person with their own interests and ideas and feelings. And if you don't believe me, think back to what it was like when your children were very, very young and they had no respect whatsoever for your feelings, for your time, for how tired you were. What do they see you as? A provider, your mummy or daddy. You are the sole that's the sole identity that you have as a provider for that child. When the child grows older, begins to develop a more mature understanding of itself and of others, and they begin to recognize ultimately, unless you've reared a child who's totally narcissistic, that the parent has their own distinct identity beyond the role of a parent, that they're more than just a parent. They are a person as well, with their own life and interests and other things which take them beyond parenting, but which includes parenting. And it's the same with God. He is a creator, but he's beyond that as well. And that's what we see in this next slide here, the perspective of God. Either as our creator or as a person in their own right, what he is in his essence. Because the first perspective constitutes a very incomplete, immature view of God. It's like the child thinking that a parent exists only because they exist. But God precedes the act of creation, and he exists beyond it and outside of its bounds. He's not limited by creation. He's not defined by creation. He creates, but he's much bigger and beyond all of that. And that is our text number 8 on page 158. And this is taken from the Rebbe Shnezom of Liadi. Once again, this is deep Hasidic language over here, which is not as easy to understand as some of the other texts we've had tonight. But let me read it for you. An intimate form of creation-sustaining divinity, referred to as Memaleh, filling the universe, breathes within each item of existence. God is within the world. He exists within nature, within everything. But far beyond that, a highly intense and abstract form of divinity, referred to as Sovev, encompassing the universe, not filling the universe, but surrounding it, encompassing it, uniformly envelops all of existence. However, God himself, his essence, is utterly beyond even that level, beyond the entire concept of universe. We cannot possibly refer to God himself as pervading existence, or even just encompassing it. The fact that the universe is brought into existence and is actively sustained through God's divinity is not a primary feature of God himself. Rather, as we say in our daily prayers, you were there before creation, before the creation of the universe. You are there since the creation of the universe. No change whatsoever. This entire universe brings no change to God. So this therefore helps us to understand the limitation of the perspective of the patriarchs, the perspective that they brought into the world, and by extension, the limitation of this concept of the home that they built for God. The patriarchs educated the world about its creator, but who and what God is outside of and beyond creation, who and God truly is, this they didn't discuss at all. That was not their innovation. So even with the incredible spiritual efforts of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, their families, God's vision was still as yet incomplete, and history therefore had to continue to unfold. As long as the world was running as usual, and all that was perceived was the hand of the one who guides nature, something drastic would have to happen to rock nature of its moorings. And that therefore brings us to the next dramatic moment in Jewish history, the period of Egyptian slavery, and what it brings to the party in terms of taking us further towards fulfillment of the divine objective. So Egyptian slavery, of course, is a very painful and a very traumatic time, but it plays a pivotal role in advancing the fulfillment of God's purpose. But to understand this a little bit more, let's just understand more generally the process of growth. Because growth or change is almost inevitably associated with pain. You know the old saying, no pain, no gain. That's what happens when you want to lose weight. Yeah? If you want the gain of being slim, it comes with pain. And the more radical the pain, the more radical the gain. But why? Why does there need to be, why does it have to be painful in order for things to be gainful? And the answer is because change, by definition, means abandoning what was in order to make room for what will be. And if the past is retained and not discarded, then what will be won't be changed, it'll just be evolution. It'll be a continuation of what was. So if there has to be real radical change, the past has to be demolished to build something completely new, radically new in its place. And demolishing what was, as you know in all of our lives, is always very, very painful. Before we even talk about ourselves, think of the disruptive technologies that destroyed stable, long-established companies that nobody thought would ever be knocked off their perch. Think of IBM, inviolate. Who would ever knock IBM off its blue chip perch until along comes personal computing. Think of Kodak, a company that we all relied upon. In all of our younger years, all of us bought Kodak film. There's no Kodak anymore. Why? Because of the invention of digital photography. And there's no longer need for celluloid film. And this is true on every level of existence. A seed has to disintegrate in the ground in order to produce a tree. A caterpillar has to cease to be a caterpillar in order for the butterfly to emerge from the cocoon. And an idea has to be utterly challenged and refuted in order for a higher truth to be realized. And here we have a nice picture of a caterpillar abandoning of what was until you get a nothing, and out of the nothing comes room for what will be. And that really is the deeper story of Egyptian slavery. Jacob's family immigrates to Egypt. Initially, life is relatively peaceful, but soon the children of Israel slip into the clutches of Egypt, and what begins as voluntary labor turns into forced labor, and then it becomes brutal slavery. And so at the height of Egyptian slavery, we would be forgiven for believing that the Jewish experiment of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their families, along with the message that it carried, was over. And the words of Maimonides again, in text number 9 on page 161. I'll read it. The concept of monotheism introduced by Abraham proceeded and gathered strength among the descendants of Jacob and those who rallied to them until they became a nation within the world that knew God. And this lasted until the Jews' extended stay in Egypt. And there they regressed. They learned from the Egyptians' ways and began worshipping idols as they did, with the exception of the tribe of Levi, who clung to the mitzvot of the patriarchs and never served false gods. The fundamental principle that Abraham planted came awfully close to being uprooted, whereby the descendants of Jacob would have returned entirely to the world's erroneous perception of God and adopted their crooked ways. So by all natural accounts, the Jewish story is done. It's over. Pharaoh is mighty. Egypt is formidable. No slave has ever escaped from Egypt. And therefore, judging by the laws of nature, there is no hope for the Jewish people. And therefore, if God is being defined as nothing more than the creator of nature, the way in which the patriarchs defined him, then that's it. It's over. Nature has done what nature does. Full circle, and that's where we are. The mighty dominate the weak. Predators devour the prey. That's nature. Put yourself in the shoes for a moment of those ancient Israelites, who, by the way, amongst whom, by definition, were your ancestors and my ancestors. Somebody member of our family was actually there, otherwise we wouldn't be here. How would you feel? What would be your mindset if you were a slave in Egypt? Probably that there's no God, or if there's one, he's let you down big time. The law of nature rules. The strong crush the weak. That's what nature does. And so it's no wonder, therefore, that the Jewish people initially don't even heed Moses when he comes and promises them redemption. Not the greatest slide, but the one that they want to show us. Every vestige of faith is crushed, which shakes the foundation of our belief in God. And this, therefore, sets the scene perfectly for the next big step forward. Now that nature has failed the fledgling nation, they are ready to see a deeper truth. That there's more to God than creation. There's more to God than simply his role as the designer of the natural order. We're coming back to our chart again. You can see it on page 162 in figure 4.4, or you can see it here on the slide. So that's our bingo board, yes? We've got the no, no, no for Garden of Eden. And now we've got Abraham. So we need to start filling this out. Is it in the lowly realm? Yes, it is. Is it God's essence? No, it's just God as creator. Is it built by us? Abraham, yes, he does it himself. We've got 2 yeses, but still 1 no. And therefore we haven't yet met all of the criteria. So in Egypt, the laws of nature failed the children of Israel. But through the story of the Exodus and all the episodes that follow, they discover a reality. The reality that God actually transcends creation and nature. That he's not bound by the mechanics of the universe. That he created the mechanics and therefore he can break them at any time. And this truth was in full display with the Exodus from Egypt and the revelation at Mount Sinai. God sends 10 plagues upon the Egyptians. Each one of these plagues breaks almost every known law of the universe. Staffs don't turn into snakes. Water doesn't turn to blood. Fire and ice don't commingle. Darkness doesn't immobilize people. The splitting of the sea. Water flows. It doesn't stand upright like a solid wall. And the revelation at Mount Sinai, millions of people gathered together, hearing the voice of God thundering his truth, I am your God, from a voice so powerful it shook their souls loose from their bodies. So the Exodus experience and the revelation at Mount Sinai demonstrated a new truth to the people, to the world, that God is higher than nature. He's in control. He's not bound by natural laws. He is above all the limitations of nature. He may be the architect of nature, but is also above the rules of nature. And this is alluded to, by the way, in the first words that God uttered at Mount Sinai. Here are 2 texts, 10a and 10b. Once again, 10a is quoting the words from the Bible, and 10b is a commentary on it by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, page 164. Would somebody like to read for a change? 10a first.
I'll come round again.
Okay, thanks.
I am your God who extracted you from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage.
Okay, and now the commentary.
The biblical commentators wonder why God emphasized, I am your God, who extracted you from the land of Egypt, instead of, I am your God who created heaven and earth. Surely the latter demonstrates a far greater feat. The explanation is that the Exodus demonstrates something far more wondrous than creation. The Exodus demonstrates that after creating heaven and earth with a defined set of rules of nature, God is nevertheless able to alter the natural order and to conduct the universe in an entirely supernatural manner.
So there you are, with the Exodus and the Sinai experience, the world is introduced to a deeper truth, God's essence, bigger than just the Creator. And it is a giant step forward in the fulfillment of the purpose of making a home for God on this earth. Okay. Well, it seems that with the Exodus and the revelation at Sinai, we're done. Okay? because that was our missing tick in the previous box. The world has finally reached its perfection and purpose. Okay, spoiler alert. History continued to unfold with more spiritual ups and downs, and so we know that we're not done. But why not? Well, we probably know the answer by now. It's because God was doing all the work. God took us out of Egypt, split the sea, spoke to us at Sinai. We were just carried along for the ride. And remember the mission statement for the creation of the world with which we started. He desired to have a home for his essence in the lowest realms, initiated and created by the actions of we who inhabit the lowest realm. And that's the part that is missing. That's what was missing in the whole story of Egypt and Sinai. So 2 out of 3 boxes are checked, but not the third. He wants a home, but he wants one built by our effort, by our initiative and our work, because if God is doing the work, it's not a home in the first place. He wants the world to be transformed by us, bottom up. And a world transformed top down is not actually transformed at all. You call that imposition, not transformation. And that's why Mount Sinai, the very place where God revealed himself to the world, is not a holy place. We don't revere Mount Sinai. We revere the place where the temple stood. But you don't see anybody making trips to Mount Sinai or thousands of people gathering there on holy days. It's a forgotten place for us as Jews. Most people can't even tell you where it is, because it's a place where God imposed himself on us, not a place where we made it happen. And that's text number 11 on page 166, which reads as follows. The divine revelation of the giving of the Torah occurred in a top-down manner. Our lower reality was unprepared to receive this revelation of divine light, and consequently it was unable to internalize to a noticeable degree the light that it did receive. For that reason, the revelation of divine light at the giving of the Torah was temporary. It ended abruptly, as described in the verse. When an extended blast is sounded with a ram's horn, they may once again ascend the mountain. For the divinity dissipated entirely, leaving the mountain unchanged. And by the way, this idea is not only true of divine revelations and of homes. This is true of practically every area of our life and our experience. Because as we all know, real change happens from within. Change, by definition, cannot be imposed. And if it is imposed, it's not change. You might call it conforming, but it's not change. I worked in many years ago in change management, and you had these consultants, management consultants, who would come into large companies with amazing plans to change the companies radically, from top down, etc. Go through the entire company with all of the changes, etc. As soon as they left, everything reverted back to exactly the way it was before. And the reason was because it wasn't bottom up, it was top down. By the way, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is just one, but the light bulb must really want to change. And God doesn't want the world just to conform to him. He wants a world that willingly changes from inside out to invite him in. So once again, the model home for God delivered to us by God himself was incomplete. And once again, the model has to be demolished so the real thing can take its place. Cue the sin of the golden calf. 40 days after the greatest divine revelation of all time, the Jewish people fashion and worship the golden calf. And on the surface, this is an unmitigated disaster. This is divine infidelity of the worst order. And while that is, of course, true, there is, as we're trying to say tonight in every instance, another way to look at this episode. It's only through destroying that we arrive at what can be. The Jewish people had been handed a home for God on a silver platter at Sinai. They chose to throw it away. The only way to regain it now was for them to fight for it on their own, with their own initiative and effort. And that is text number 12 on page 167. It's a short one. The sin of the golden calf transpired due to a preceding supernal decision. Through such an event, the people will achieve the superiority of the Shuvah. The whole episode of the golden calf is in order to bring us to the point where we need to return, to come back to find God, because we have fallen so far. An amazing insight. So, from our new perspective, the sin of the golden calf is another necessary step forward. And now that we've destroyed the home that God gave us, it'll be up to our efforts to create the true home for God. Right, let's come back to our bingo board and see how we are progressing. Okay, you can find it on page 168 in figure 4.5, or we can take a look at our slide. Okay, so far we've seen the Garden of Eden with the 3 no's. We've seen the patriarchs who gave us 2 yeses and 1 no. What's the Exodus and Sinai going to do for us? Let's take a look. Is it in the lowly realm? Yes, it is. Is it God's essence? Yes, it is. What's the problem? It wasn't built by us. It was done by God. We're not there yet. And so we come to our 4th act. And that, of course, is Holy Temple and exile. So in the aftermath of the sin of the golden calf, having destroyed all that had been given by God, the Jewish people had to once again begin to build. So first they build the Mishkan, which is the sanctuary in the desert, the tabernacle. Later on they build the Holy Temple, the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem. And these were literal manifest homes for God. They were spaces where the truth of God's essence was really obvious and revealed to all. That's what was special about those places. And these homes for God were created by the people, a people driven by the failure of their own actions, driven to return to God, driven to create a space for God with even greater intensity after having been turned away. That was the whole idea of building the sanctuary immediately after the sin of the golden calf, and then subsequently the building of the temples. So here we are, a home for God, created by the people, driven to return to God. I think we have another text over here, and it's on text number 13, on page 170. Thank you.
The divine presence was manifested within the tabernacle as a result of the Jewish people's tangible efforts in accordance with their mandate. They should make a sanctuary for me. And because the divine presence's manifestation occurred through human action, sanctity became installed within the materiality of the tabernacle's components. Consequently, the physical tabernacle and its components gained a lasting sanctity.
Thank you very much, John. Okay, so they built it, and the divine presence rested in it. And that seems finally to have been the moment that we've been waiting for, the fulfillment of God's original purpose of having a home on earth. What went wrong? But even a holy temple in its various incarnations, even then there's still a strong measure of dependence that the people have on God. On a very fundamental level, this home for God has been commanded to us by God. So it's not entirely of our doing. So while it's true the Jewish people picked themselves up after the sin of the golden calf and worked very hard to build it, it still wasn't fully, completely by them. At the end of the day, the temple project was initiated by God from above. And the other thing about building the home is that God says a very big Yasha Koyach, you're doing really well. There is, his presence comes immediately. There's a kind of very encouraging spiritual feedback. And this positive feedback loop takes away, in a sense, from the bottom-up, self-driven effort that is required for us to be able to truly build God's home.
Shlomo,
Yes.
just in regard to the last bit of reading there, it implies that the sanctity of the tabernacle was as a result of man's efforts. And that, how does that reconcile with Israel and the necessity to have a temple in Israel if actually the Shekinah or God's presence came about through man's own efforts and not necessarily the location itself?
It came about through man's efforts by the command of God. We were responding to a command by God. So it's not, yes, we responded with effort, but we're not the initiators. The idea was not our idea. So,
thank you. The question was more about the geographic location. It seems divorced from the sanctity
well, the ultimate sanctity was intended, as you see very clearly in the Bible, to be Jerusalem. And during the time they were in the desert, there's God's presence would travel with them in a temporary geographic space. But that's not the ultimate space. The ultimate space is that point at the moment, which is occupied by a mosque. But it was transitional. It was part of the process. Does that answer the question?
It does, thank you.
Okay. All right, so God's intention and purpose can only be satisfied when we build his home under conditions of acute spiritual darkness. Acute spiritual darkness. Because only then are the actions going to come solely from us, when there's no God present whatsoever. We've got to come back to our bingo chart again. One more time. Okay. So here's temple in our last box. Are we going to be able to tick all the boxes? This is the big moment. If we get ticks, then my suggestion to you is you should immediately book your flights to Israel. You want to get there before the Mashiach arrives so that you get a nice, good position in Herzliya overlooking the sea. Okay, let's try it. Is it in the lowly realm? This low world? Yes. Is it God's essence? Yes. Is it built by us? Well, yes and no. Built by us, but in response to God's command. And that's the problem. Not completely.
Shlomo?
Yes. Hang on a second. Let me capture this thought first, and we'll come back to your question, Ilan. So the next thing which happens is the Holy Temple is destroyed, and the Jewish people go into exile. And with this exile comes the greatest test of all. Would we create a space for God under the darkest of conditions? We've never been in exile before. We might have been in Egypt, but this was pre-Sinai, and we're still at the beginning of our journey, and now for the first time we're out. Would we remain committed to God while suffering persecution? Even more challenging, would we remain committed to God in the good times, when as Jews we would be accepted and welcomed in wider society? Would we keep on doing good when we couldn't see the light born of our actions? We couldn't see the outcome of what we're doing. And so I think what the whole philosophy, Hasidic, Kabbalistic philosophy, Chabad philosophy, wants to teach is that it is only in this exile, with all the darkness with none of the light, when God's concealment is at its most intense, that our positive actions can only be fully attributable to us and not to God. Because if in this exile we choose to reach toward God and invite him in, then that must be a self-driven invitation, a real bottom-up initiative. And that is what builds a home for God. That is what he desired in creating the world. Let's just read this text over here and show you this text number 14 on page 172. Ilan, why don't you read this one for us, and we'll come to your question.
Thank you, Shlomo. The future revelation. The future revelation in the Messianic era, that is the God of creation, is generated by our actions and divine service during these times of exile. For it is during our exile, to a far greater extent than during the temple eras, that our power of self-sacrifice shines. This is because it is specifically the spiritual darkness and divine concealment predominant during exile that mobilizes our potential for self-sacrifice.
Okay. What's your question, Ilan?
The wonderful segue into my thinking at the moment. And just a very simple question. I understand that there are two phases to the Messian, the Mashiach, in terms of what he has to accomplish and ultimately accomplish. I understand that I think some sages talk about there maybe even being two different people. And the question is there any discussion in the literature about there being 4 temples and not 3?
No. The third temple exists, is the ultimate, and it's the apex, and it's the total complete fulfillment. It ushers in the Messianic era, and we'll look at that in some detail next week and the week after that in terms of process and how it happens, etc. We'll come to that in a moment. All right. So for the past 1950 years or so, since the expulsion, since the exile after the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era, we've been in a pretty low place, both physically and spiritually, including, as Marilyn mentioned, some horrific events such as the Holocaust. And notwithstanding some brief respites and some very remarkable luminaries during this time, but we have endured every conceivable hardship, every program and campaign bent on annihilation, culminating, of course, in the Holocaust. And it is very easy to look at the Jewish world with despair and to say, we are just a persecuted people in a place of profound darkness. But the Kabbalists, and certainly the Lubavitcher Rebbe, blessed memory, steeped in Kabbalistic understanding, saw this not as a negative, but saw this as the deepest, profoundest potential for change. Because despite everything, we've kept pushing and pushing and pushing to make this world a home for God. We've kept striving to transform the darkness to light, not because we see God, not because we feel God, but because we choose to do so purely from within.
If we can.
And that's the only way to fulfill the purpose of creation. It all depends on our initiative. So in a perverse and in a paradoxical way, the darkness of this exile actually forms the perfect setting to achieve the goal of making a home for God. And there are 2 distinct stages in this long exile since the destruction of the Second Temple. One was persecution, where we're not allowed to create a home for God, but we do it anyway. And the second is freedom, where we're given the freedom to choose what to do, who to be, and we nevertheless choose to build a home for God. So today we're probably living in the latter stage. We live in free countries, countries that permit us to be and to act as we desire. And it is specifically in this context, and this was why the Rebbe was so excited and so energized and so motivated, and why he pushed and promoted and energized a whole generation of young people with his ideal, with his vision. He said, we're living in an age of freedom where we can choose, genuinely choose. And it's specifically in this context that we can truly and finally build a home for God as he originally desired. The deepest challenge of exile is when we're living in a secular society and things are good. Because under these circumstances, with so many choices of lifestyle available to us, we have to dig very deep to choose the one that will lead to bring God into the world. I heard, and I can't attribute it, but I heard that there was once a discussion with one of the previous Rebbes, the previous Rebbe, but one, and sitting around the table with his Hasidim, and his Hasidim asked the question, Rebbe, why is the Mashiach going to come in our generation and didn't come in previous generations? And he said, because our generation have self-sacrifice. He said, the Hasidim said, but what do you mean? The sacrifice that Jews made throughout all the ages was absolutely immense. Even think about the stories about Rabbi Akiva and the other martyrs, who sacrificed their lives, to promote the faith and to keep Judaism alive. How can you say that we have self-sacrifice? And the Rebbe said to him, no, you have to understand, the self-sacrifice today is qualitatively different to the self-sacrifice of any previous age. Because in the previous age, the sacrifice was, I know that I'm a Jew, and there are people out there who are trying to take away from me my right to continue to live and to act as a Jew. Today, the self-sacrifice for young people is to choose to be a Jew, to recognize that one is a Jew, because there are so many other choices, because one is taken in by the culture around us, because there's a process of a culturalization, of becoming part of a broader, welcoming, open society. Pretty much for the first time in all of our history. There has never been a time like this for us as Jews. Some brief moments, possibly, the golden age of Spain, which wasn't so golden, by the way. And yes, there's anti-Semitism around, but in the Western world, we are free. We are accepted. We can go to occupy any part of this world that we want, in politics and science, in professions, etc., and culturally, in music and art. So under these circumstances, with so many choices of lifestyle available to us, we have to dig very deep to choose the one that is going to lead to bringing God into the world. And if God wants us to choose to build a home for him, it's in the times of freedom that choice is really the most meaningful. And that is, I think, our final text for tonight. Text number 15 on page 175. I'll read it. Like an olive is crushed. Once again, this is taken from the Insights of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Like an olive is crushed so that its oil can provide illumination, the crushing that we experience in exile causes the revelation of our soul's most essential light. However, there are two distinct degrees of crushing. We are crushed by external pressures such as decrees against the performance of Torah and mitzvot, or we experience freedom and prosperity in both the material and spiritual sense, and nevertheless we are crushed and broken internally by the fact that we remain in a state of spiritual exile. Of the two possible experiences, our brokenness over the very fact that we are still in exile is the one that must produce the ultimate light. Well, we began the class tonight with the assumption that our spiritual history is comprised of a series of ups and downs, steps forward and steps backwards. What we've tried to show tonight is another way of looking at history that consisted in fact of necessary forward-facing steps along the road towards the fulfillment of the divine intention in creating the world, which was laid out in that pithy midrash that God wanted a home in the lowest of worlds, created by us. Not every moment of our history has been comfortable, and certainly not enjoyable. But true progress rarely is that way. Remember that growth, radical change, always involves losing something that was in order to be able to achieve what can and must be. And by the way, the same is true actually in all of our lives. There isn't a single one of us who has not been through personal ups and downs in our lives. We've had some high moments, and we've pretty much all of us had some low ones. We've had some times of success, and there have been times of failure. It's not always in a personal sense. Sometimes it's in relationships, sometimes in regard to children, sometimes in regard to profession, and sometimes it's just in regard to the way we feel inside of ourselves. And we would be forgiven for believing that life is just a roller coaster, filled with progress and retreat. But what is true of history is also true of our own lives. Nothing that happens is by mistake, including the choices that we make. If it is part of our story, then it's part of our growth. Where we find ourselves today is perfectly aligned on the path of forward progress, even if you find yourself in the treacle stage of life. Don't be daunted by apparent missteps. If we've slipped backwards, that means that we can progress forwards with even greater intensity. And the personal takeaway, therefore, for tonight's lesson, and the takeaway for the Jewish people as a whole, is that it is we who choose to have a relationship with God, not He who chooses to have a relationship with us. And we make that choice not for personal benefit or for reward, but because it's an imperative. It is the imperative of being a Jew. It's the reason why God has put us in His created world. It's time for our final summing up video.
Lesson 4. We're getting there. 1. God desires a home in the lowest realm. This has 3 specifications. It must be the lowest realm, receptive to God's essence, and fashioned by its mortal inhabitants. All 3 conditions must be met fully and simultaneously. 2. The spiritual peaks and pits of our history were all steps forward toward this goal. 3. Initially, the world was physically and spiritually beautiful and was inhabited by God. The drawback? It met none of the specifications. It was too spiritual, unprimed for God's essence, and lacking the initiative to embrace God. The sin of the tree of knowledge was necessary to ensure that our physical realm was truly the lowest. 4. Abraham discovered God on his own and shared God with the world, creating a quasi-home for God. The drawback? Abraham educated the world about its creator, but God's essence beyond creation was not yet revealed. 5. The Exodus and giving of the Torah introduced God's essence, transcendent of creation. The drawback? It was imposed by divine acts. It was not the result of internal transformation. 6. The sin of the golden calf removed the superimposed divine awareness. The Jews then erected the tabernacle and, later, the Jerusalem temples, where God's essence was obvious and revealed in man-made homes. The drawback? human initiative was undermined by strong divine dependence because A, these edifices were God's initiatives, and B, God provided instant spiritual feedback. 7. In exile, we persisted in transforming this world into God's home despite every hardship and persecution. We did so without seeing or sensing God, based exclusively on our mortal initiative. Today's free societies offer the ultimate final challenge, choosing to make a home for God without the influence of overt divinity and without even the external stimulus of persecution. Now it is truly us inviting God. 8. This journey is reflected in our own lives. Even our past regretful choices facilitate a plan and are steps forward in our personal growth.
Well, there you are. Anybody want to talk, comment?
I'm wondering whether, if I can just clarify something. It seems to me that God was instrumental in creating everything that he created up until the Exodus. And then he says, and you're saying, or whoever makes these comments is saying, that in order to find him, we must feel it from within. He's not going to find us. We have to find him. It's almost as if he's become passive once he's done his work. He doesn't want to be instrumental in anything. He just wants to sit back and let us all idolize him, if you like. So it means that we have to almost make an image ourselves of what we think God is like and how we feel we can acknowledge him.
I don't think it's so much that we have to make an image. I think that we have to actually find his essence, actually touch the... Remember, we've got some very powerful receptors inside of us, Marilyn. We've got a little bit of God inside all of us in the form of our souls. So we are connected. So it is true, of course, that over the course of the ages, lots of people have created God in their own image. And that's why you've got a plethora of different takes on facets of Judaism, to this day. Some of them are crazy, and others make more sense. But if there's a certain kind of ultimate truth there, the truth of God's existence, that's the one that we have to search for. And yes, we make mistakes along the way. We take bypaths, and sometimes we come up with the wrong solutions. We don't find the real God. We create false gods of one form or another. This is a lovely story. King David said, "Oh, but you are a God who hides himself." And the Midrash tells a story about that some children were playing hide and seek. I think it's a story about the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was driving along with some of his disciples, and they found a little boy crying at the side of the road. So they stopped and they said, "Why are you crying?" He said, "I was playing hide and seek with my friends, and I was the one who had to hide. And I hid so well that they couldn't find me, and so they've all gone away because they've stopped looking for me." And the Baal Shem Tov gave him a sweet or something like that, placated him. And when they got back into the carriage, his disciples said to him, "You always teach that everything that we see in life has a lesson for us. What do we learn from this little episode?" He said, "This is what King David said, 'Oh, but you are a God who hides himself.'" God played hide and seek in the world. He revealed himself, and then through the sin of the golden calf, he withdrew, and he hid himself. And now he leaves it to man. It's a game of hide and seek. And perhaps, says the Baal Shem Tov, maybe God also sheds a tear because we've stopped looking. We couldn't find him. He hid too well. So we've stopped. The game is over. We've gone on to do other things. We're not looking anymore. we have to search. We have to make it happen. We have to find it. But what is remarkable about this over here is the way in which certainly the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory saw in this moment not despair, but a huge, huge opportunity. He saw assimilation all around, and he saw everything that he stood for in his life from his younger life, all kind of like swept away. And like a giant, he's Abrahamic figure. He said, "Come on, folks, come on, children." He said, "We're going to find God. There's a story over here. Don't go away. Don't give in to all of these. Be proud of who you are, and know that you are a Jew, and rediscover Judaism, make the world a place that God can live in, make it his home, etc." So, in many respects, post-Second World War, which decimated the whole of the Jewish nation, and certainly wiped out large swathes of the greatest figures of that age, the leaders, the religious communities, all wiped out. And post-Holocaust, it has been a time of revolution. This has been a revolutionary age for us. The fact of the matter is that there are more people studying in yeshivot and in seminaries around the world today, particularly in Israel and in parts of America, than in the entire history of the world since its creation. Of course, the population is bigger, but it has been a massive, massive revolutionary change. Yes, compared to overall population, it is, minuscule. Overall Jewish population, I'm talking about. If there are some in the region of, say, 9 million Jews today, etc., how many of them are, committed, observant, Shabbat observant, etc.? But it's the whole Baal Teshuva movement post-1967 has been extraordinary. The growth of communities has been extraordinary. Even here in England, the growth of Jewish communities in the post-war years has been extraordinary. So we are, in a sense, collectively, you can't get away from the fact that there's something which is happening, and the Rebbe wanted to capitalize on that. Want to say, no, it's precisely at this moment of, when freedom is offered to us and we really have to search, that's when it's going to come from us most. When it's not going to be God doing it. It's a real game of hide and seek. And that's what excited so many young people with a new sense of mission, an ideal, something to live for, something to strive for. Young people need ideals, One of the things which has gone wrong with our world is that there are no ideals for young people anymore other than just to become rich. And that's not a very good ideal. It's not one that really works. So to infuse young people with growing up in Russia, and young Jews had an ideal, it was called communism. It was a big idea, or socialism, or, French Revolution, liberty, etc. What was the ideal of the 20th century? Nothing. Materialism. So along comes this giant figure and offers a brand new spiritual ideal based upon all of these, didn't make it up, deeply digging into these Kabbalistic, Hasidic concepts, bringing them out, explaining them, telling us what a home means, explaining what a home is, talking about a naked God, one who's not garbed, does not, you can see, that you can feel, that you can touch, etc. Revolutionary ideas. All right, well, look, let me tell you that it's going to get a lot easier now, the next couple of sessions. Okay.
Right, will he present himself?
No. What we're going to do is next week we have to now talk about, so how does it happen? Who is this person? What is Mashiach? How do we get a handle on who this person is? How does he emerge? Is there a process? How does the world begin to change? All of that is really fascinating. People have got some pretty weird ideas about it. People think about Mashiach like they think about the Big Bang Theory, that suddenly it's going to be, like a fireworks display. Suddenly, bang, something is going to happen. But that's not the way the texts see it at all. So next week and the week after, we're going to wrap up this whole journey by getting really practical and laying out exactly how it works, who it is, what the sages said about the personality of the Mashiach, who is this extraordinary person who is able to affect the world in such a dramatic way. Is that person still waiting to be born? Is it an ordinary person? Is it somebody who comes from heaven? All of that kind of stuff all coming up. But it's a lot easier than the hard stuff that we've been through over the last 4 weeks. You'll be pleased to know. Okay?
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Look forward
Thanks,
to,
Norma. Good night. Thank
look
you.
forward to seeing you.
Good night,
Thank you for
everyone.
joining. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Shlomo. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Right.
Recording stopped.
This is interesting. The bit
It-
that,
Marilyn.
Saxon-
It's just me, my sister, and you. Oh, John's still here and Michael's still here. So carry on. Okay.
Hi, Lydia. I just actually, before we started, I don't know why the page opened at the additional readings at the end of each chapter that we've done. At the end of each section, there's always additional reading.
Yes.
And this one is by Rabbi Sachs. And I just sort of started to read the beginning of it, but I didn't know what the lecture was going to be about. But I'm going to finish reading it tonight because I have a great belief in him. That
Yeah, no, he's terrific. Yeah.
yes, and his comments are always spot on.